Hi, everybody. My name is Ben, and I'm here with Adrian. We just finished up the episode 58 of the question, and I thought we would spend just a moment kind of catching up and chatting about some of the things that we took away from the conversation. It was really fun, as always, just really smart people showing up to kind of challenge each other and broaden each other's perspectives. So, Adrian, thank you so much for joining and for bringing this question to the community. I'm curious to hear from you after having, sort of participated for the last hour with all those folks. What is it that you're interested in? What did you take away from it? Like, what do you want to do next? Like, where are you at?
I think what was interesting for me is one, like honoring the differences in tooling and insight that we have between like design and engineering. Because I'm an engineer, when we're talking about deviations, like I have this very specific engineering mindset with it. I know what tools are available for me. And then what I've heard a lot of in the discussion is like the ability to keep track of deviations and just have more insight. It seems really limited in the design world. And um, I'm just, yeah, interested in um, acknowledging the ways that those tools are different between the different disciplines and maybe finding ways where we can like help each other out a bit more. Um, yeah, that was like a surprise to me, but a very valid problem worth pursuing.
Yeah, in some ways, it feels a little bit like the tooling in the design space has evolved very rapidly in the last few years with tools that are like much more collaborative, in design, things like Figma and PenPot. But there's still a lot of a lot that's yet to be there, in terms of like the automation of a lot of those tasks like we can do in code. There were some interesting folks or interesting perspectives from folks who joined around using some plugins in Figma or custom built
Mhm.
plugins to be able to kind of almost lint, like you had suggested, Adrian, almost lint the design as they're doing it. I'm excited to explore that a little bit more for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, some of the stuff that I picked up on in the answers was really fascinating. Like this whole idea of categorizing deviations, right? And that kind of led us down a path of what are the categories, but also are they always good or bad? Or like what's the context of the organization? How do you think about that categorization of deviation in your work at Honeycomb, Adrian?
Mhm. There's like two different problems I think that you're solving here, or two different questions you're asking, which is one, you can categorize deviations as being, I think someone said further down in the book jam, like justified versus not justified, like using the system in a way that it's not intended to be used. And I
Yeah.
feel like those require some amount of like just manual combing through to like look at the actual use and have a conversation with someone. The other way that I think about categorizing them, again, this is really engineering specific of me, but is looking at exactly what properties are being overridden. And so the tooling that I'm working on setting up right now is to tell me specifically what, like, is it color being overridden? Is it text wrapping? Is it font size or things like that? And I would like to be able to like tally that as much as possible. And I'm getting there. And then that tells me, okay, thematically, what are the most common overrides? And if there's enough of them, that signals that like that is probably justified because there's enough hunger for this feature or style in the product that like it seems to need to be built into the system. The examples I've seen where a component override was like unjustified was changing like spacing and alignment. And in that case, we when we were reviewing the code, which we were able to identify through our um, scanner script, uh, was just having a conversation with the team and like asking what they needed it for. And then in several cases, we found out that they were just saying like, oh, well, that's what the Figma design said. So I just took the Figma design literally and implemented it exactly. So there's some amount of culture shift that needs to change where engineers need to know that they are allowed to ask designers for clarity or pushback.
Yeah.
Um, because also when the designers were brought that question of like, oh, do you actually want it to be eight, like 11 pixels, or is it okay to be 8 to 12 because that's what our design system says. And in that case, the designers often are like, oh, that was just an oversight, or I hadn't updated the design. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think we kind of settled on the idea, or at least there was some agreement in the participants in the call, that deviations aren't necessarily right or wrong. It's just a signal. And I love that as a sort of like a reframing. I think even the word deviation kind of has like a negative connotation to it. And it's like, well, okay, nobody's like out here, being intentionally malicious, like we're just trying to build good product. Everybody in the org is trying to do that. So if we kind of go in with that understanding, then deviations are like the tracking of deviations are one tool in a big toolkit, that we can use to sort of indicate things. Maybe it is that they've deviated because the design system and like in Figma versus the design system assets in code are different. And so
Yeah.
it wasn't an intentional thing. Another reason might be they don't actually know how to use the components well, right? Like maybe there's a skill gap that we can see that as a signal. It's like that wasn't intentional. It's just a lack of skill and understanding. So how do we, maybe do some trainings with those folks? Um, it could be that the components, the assets we're offering are just not meeting the needs of a product, right?
Mm.
That's not their fault, you know? So so I think like just being open to that was something I was really, after having read through the data, that's something that really stood out to me, is like there's a lot of ways to frame this. Did you feel that in the conversation today too?
Yeah, definitely. And I even noticed myself reflecting on it during the conversation, thinking like maybe overrides is a better term to use
Mhm.
here that's less charged with like morals. Um,
Yeah.
what I'm thinking of is, yeah, someone like needing to override a portion of the system to accomplish a goal that they have.
Yeah, I love that. Even the words are so important, so finding one that's a better fit like that, I think could really be helpful.
Mhm.
And that kind of gets to another topic we covered, which was the posture of the system team. And it's sort of like what you're describing there, it kind of exactly, addresses that. We saw some folks saying things like the information that we have in our tracking is good, but gathering it's really hard since people seem like they don't want us to know if they're deviating, So it's like they're like nervous, they don't want to be caught deviating. Have you had that experience or?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been told like folks being nervous, but the benefit of the way that our system strategically allows overrides is we are informed without them having to tell us. And we
Yeah,
like try to position ourselves as much as possible to be really approachable. And it's all over our documentation when you use that escape hatch for applying overrides. It
yeah,
says like, please don't do this unless you absolutely have to. If you need like a design change, like talk to us. And
yeah,
sometimes that happens. And then other times we find out because we're just tracking that prop usage. Um, and that's fine. Like, I think the point there is I think it's valuable to strategically allow overrides in a way that's trackable. Like, I would rather
yeah.
provide an escape hatch that's really easy for us to monitor than I would for us to like lock everything down and force people to go through really bizarre hoops to override things because that would actually be harder for us to find out about.
Yeah, you're saying like just acknowledge it's a part of systems work, and let's give people a path. That's
Yeah.
actually a great transition. Will you just walk us through kind of at a high level the architecture of the system you're using to track deviations?
Yeah, so the centerpiece that makes all of this possible is our team is using a component architecture pattern where we have primitive components and then a variance layer. So the primitives layer is like the base components with no styling. They're essentially radix components, and those consumers can do whatever they want with. And so that is like a way for them to safely style them however they want. And if they have like a known um, deviation from the system that they need, like they can do so. The second way that we are able to keep track of deviations or overrides is that on our variance layer, and those are like the styled components layer, um, we have a prop called unsafe class names, which behaves just like a regular class names attribute, but it's just, we call it unsafe, and that's to indicate any styles that you apply here might like break are the built-in styles. And we have documentation in the code editor when they use that prompt that just says like, hey, if you need to use this, like, please talk to us. It's offered as an escape hatch, but like we want to know what styles are missing to like improve the system. So because we have a specific prop and a layer of primitives, tracking the overrides or deviations just means tracking the usage there.
Yeah.
So that is really helpful because you can do things like just like find and replace, sorry, not find and replace, but do a search in your code base to find examples of that. And then the tooling that we have on top of that is like some static code analysis that scans for actual component usage in every single file in the code base. And that is what helps us do much more powerful querying, like how many overrides are happening, what kinds of overrides are happening and stuff.
That querying, from the way that you described it in the call, you sort of are able to kind of do that scraping, gather that data, and then put it into Honeycomb, and that gives you the ability to kind of query it in interesting ways. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, we're using an open source tool called React Scanner to handle the static code analysis. And then we send that information, in our case, to Honeycomb, which is, for lack of a better term, like our data store. And that's exactly like you said, where we can write really specific queries, like total overrides of this component, total overrides by this specific team of this component,
yeah.
will overrides this month compared to last quarter, things like that.
Now, with that specific escape hatch that you described, I think you said it's what was the what was the attribute that you can
And
put for unsafe class name? Thank you. Yes. Do you suspect that that is 100% of overrides are happening in that way, or do you think there's creative engineers out there that are finding other ways to do things that they're maybe that aren't sort of intended by the system team?
I'm sure that there is some examples. Like someone brought up during the call about another way of looking at a deviation could be just not using a system component at all and using like a
Yeah,
third party library. And that's going to be harder for us to track down because that is the absence of something versus something. Um,
yeah,
but I do think so far from what I've seen, people are using that escape hatch. I
yeah,
haven't seen any real examples of like one way that I would strategically break like override styles would be if I were writing like a wrapping component or something that applies the styles that I really want and getting like really specific CSS. And fortunately, I think by providing the escape hatch, people don't have to work so hard to do that. And
yeah.
so, yeah,
It's like the path of least resistance you're giving them.
exactly. We tried to create just enough friction where you are presented with like, ooh, I'm not really supposed to do this, but if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it here, you know?
Yeah. Okay. One of the other things that we talked a little bit about was the we just were sort of asking the question, what does it cost for the consuming teams to actually override or deviate?
Mm.
Or I think the other way to frame that is, what's the cost of not tracking this stuff, right, as a system team? And you had some interesting thoughts there, as did some of the folks who attended. But do you want to sort of take a stab at giving us a little overview of that?
Yeah, I think what I noticed from the conversation is it very quickly comes back to the value of having a system in the first place. Like the whole promise of it is that it will help you make these big sweeping changes all at once. And so the risk of not tracking it is, or one that comes to mind for me at least, is like not being able to make informed estimates about if it's time for your team to make some big grand sweeping change, whether it's adding additional theming or doing a rebrand. If I don't know where and how often things are being overridden, I can't totally estimate how long it's going to take to handle fixing all of those situations when like the rebrand rolls out or something.
Yeah,
Um, it's much harder. Like if people are overriding one of our components and we completely rebrand that component, we have no idea what the downstream effects of that are going to be on those places where people overrode stuff. So,
yeah,
um, yeah, I like to have someone brought up the like known knowns, known unknowns versus unknown unknowns.
yeah.
in the chat, and like for a big project like a rebrand, I want to minimize the unknown unknowns and at least have known unknowns. So that would help me estimate like I know that there's roughly this many overrides happening, which means like we need to dedicate this amount of time to like handling that during this big project.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good, and it ties in with your sort of escape hatch. Like, let's make them known, like let's give some visibility there. Okay. I mean, I think this is great. There's so many, I felt like there were so many areas to kind of dive deeper. You did share a little bit about some of the reporting that you do to leadership, um, on the things that you're gathering. That's wonderful to see, and some of that's outlined here in the FigJam file. So if you're just watching the recap and you missed that deep dive, the FigJam file is still available to you. Hop into that. You can click and kind of drag around and see. And you also, Adrian, you also dropped a couple links here. Will you tell me quickly what these are, these pink stickies in the resources tab?
Yeah, definitely. So the first one, the one on the right, the primitives and variance component architecture pattern, that's an awesome blog post by my teammate May, who
Okay.
outlined exactly that primitives versus variance architecture that I talked about. This is what makes for us tracking those overrides or deviations possible. So that's a great read. And then to the left of it is an actual code snippet, and that shows um, it's it's a custom processor that I wrote to be used with React Scanner that specifically um, tracks component usage and ties it to code owner. React Scanner is a great tool that gives you like component counts and props usage counts out of the box. But I found our team really cares about being able to tie specific overrides or uses to the actual author,
Yeah.
and this processor helps you do that. Um,
Nice.
in addition, it sends it to, in our case, Honeycomb, but you
Yeah.
could is sending it to any data store.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing those resources as well. If you want to get connected with Adrian, you can also jump into that FigJam file. There's a LinkedIn profile link to there, or you can also check out, of course, the description here in this video. Adrian, thank you so much. It's awesome to have you. I've learned a ton, just sort of like taking a peek into some of the stuff you've shared here and in our conversation. So I really appreciate your willingness to share with the community.
Yeah, thank you. This event is always one of my favorites. It always impresses me how much valuable information people are willing to share here and what
Yeah.
ideas they bring, and it's just such a special place to share ideas. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Likewise. All right. Thanks everybody for watching.